As you've heard on Bridge City News, the Alberta government fired the entire AIMCO board last week. Now, the group manages public pension funds in our province, along with a Heritage Savings Fund. The group was also the probable manager of the Alberta Pension Plan, should we pull out of the CPP. Now, to chat about this and more conversation here is our legislative reporter and the Alberta correspondent for the National Post, Tyler Dawson, who joins us once again from Edmonton. Tyler, Finance Minister Nate Horner wiped out the board, citing rising expenses and the returns were simply not good enough?
Yeah, that's what he's arguing. Now, there certainly has been some rising costs. There's been an increase in the number of sort of fees paid to third-party managers and salary and wage costs and things like that with AIMCO. Part of the reason for that is probably that it's simply grown. AIMCO has gotten the funds managed by AIMCO have gotten bigger over the last several years. It's more than $160 billion at this point. So, but that's obviously part of the government's concern. The other part of the government's concern is the returns that AIMCO is generating. Interestingly, they've more or less actually cleared their sort of benchmark targets over the last 5 and 10 years by a percentage point here and a point one of a percentage point there kind of thing. So they're exceeding their benchmarks, but AIMCO's investments are certainly not performing as well as some of the other large managed funds in the country. For example, the CPP, which you mentioned, the Ontario Teachers Pension Fund is doing better as well, for example. So those are the facts as we know them. That's what the government is telling us about its justification for this, the costs and the returns. But I think it's fair to say that this whole affair has raised a lot more questions than it has answered them. We don't know who's going to manage the fund from here on out. We should know in the next 30 days or so. We don't know what this means for the Alberta Pension Plan, and we don't know what this means for the Heritage Savings Trust Fund. And those are sort of two big open questions. Now, this government they do seem to have backed off the Alberta Pension Plan proposal to some extent. But there's a good chance, if it happens, that AIMCO would be doing that management. So that does, sort of raise the question of how well would that fund be managed with all of Alberta's retirement funds. Now, the other question is the Heritage Savings Trust Fund. Now, I should clarify that, in no case has the government said anything about this decision being made in relation to the pension plan or the Heritage Savings Trust Fund. These just happen to be questions that are coming up because the Heritage Fund is this, huge block of money that's managed by AIMCO. And as I think we've talked about before, governments have a history of plundering the Heritage Fund to cover some of its budgetary needs, including Danielle Smith took 1.7 billion, I think, out of it a couple years ago. So it's on people's minds, I think. What does this mean for the Heritage Fund? And we just don't know answers to a lot of these questions at this point.
Previous premiers, I remember chatting with them, saying that the Heritage Savings Trust Fund is for rainy days, for Albertans. Well, there have been a lot of rainy days for Albertans struggling with a high cost of living, the housing crisis. Maybe we should dish out some of the Heritage Savings Trust Fund to Albertans who desperately need it right now. Just a suggestion that I threw out there. Now, Tyler, in an effort to grow our province's tourism industry, the UCP has introduced a bill to allow for a 4-season resort to be built on Crown land. Now, it's apparently seeking to copy a similar template that BC uses for Whistler. Now, the question remains, where would the Alberta resort be located?
Well, exactly. And BC has a bunch of these. You can look at Big White, you can look at Whistler, you can look at Panorama probably in the Invermere area. There's a bunch of them all over BC. And it's less the case in Alberta. If you look at, say, Marmot Basin. I mean, there isn't really a resort up at Marmot Basin other than the ski hill, but there's nothing there in the summer, really. The same for Sunshine Village and Lake Louise. There's no mountain biking in the summer in those areas. A little bit of hiking, I suppose. But anyways, the idea is to create this 4-season resort and that people will, flock to Alberta. It might spread some people out from some of the national parks, bring more money into the economy, that sort of thing. And the Crown land's not going to be sold. It'll be a 99-year lease. So that issue doesn't quite arise in this case. But, I do think it would probably be controversial depending where it goes. There's been a lot of concern lately about the amount of traffic going through the Ghost area in sort of southwest of the Sundre area, or I guess northwest of Cochrane. So where do you put it? What is it going to look like? Is it going to be a ski hill? Is it going to be a mountain bike resort? Is it going to be a gondola or a tram or something? So I think lots of questions have come up around this, but I don't know if anyone is, immediately opposed to it. It seems like a relatively good idea. So I guess we'll see where it goes. Of course, it's going to be up to the private sector in large part, right? Because the government is creating the sort of parameters that would allow for an application, and it's going to create the board that would approve an application to do this. But it's really going to be up to the private sector probably to put up the money and put up the plans for it.
I got an easy plan. How about Sylvan Lake? Skating in the wintertime and a beautiful beach in the summertime, right? There you go. Tyler, the Alberta government introduced legislation to modify financial rules in the province, and the bill does two things of note. What are they?
Well, the first is that it will allow for halal mortgages. So under Islamic law, Muslims can't really take out a traditional mortgage because of the interest. So this would sort of reform some of the rules to allow for alternative financing measures. That could look like perhaps a rent-to-own scheme. That could look like paying fees instead of an interest on a mortgage, things like that. So it's just sort of broadens the accessibility of mortgage-like financial tools to another segment of the Alberta population. The second one, which I think we've talked about before, is the $200 tax on electric vehicle registrations. This was a little bit controversial when it first came up, and the government says, look, well, if you drive a car or a truck that has an internal combustion engine, good heavens, say that 10 times fast, you're paying about $200 a year in fuel tax. And so electric vehicles obviously aren't paying fuel tax, so they are going to get this other tax that that money will go into general revenues, help boost the government's finances. They hope to bring in about $5 million in the first year, and I think it'll go up to $8 million after that. So if you own a Tesla or something, you'll be paying a bit extra when your registration comes due.
Tyler, let's talk more about the Trudeau government's plan of an emissions cap in our oil and gas sector. Premier Daniel Smith has aggressively opposed the legislation, saying that Environment Minister Stephen Guilbeault has, quote, a deranged agenda against Alberta. And the cap would apply across the country, but mostly impact Alberta and Saskatchewan, correct?
Yeah, and that's just simply because most of the sort of oil and gas and mining production happens in those two provinces. There will be some effects on Newfoundland, for example, because they have an oil industry there as well, but it's primarily going to affect Alberta. The cap is still in draft form, so there could be some modification to that. Seems unlikely given the sort of vigor with which the federal Liberals have defended it over the past week. But what it would do basically is it would require oil producers to bring their emissions 35% lower than they were in 2019, and they would need to accomplish that by 2030, 2032. Little ways off yet, but the Alberta government is essentially arguing that an emissions cap is a de facto production cap. So the only way for the oil industry to make that target would be to cut back production, is what they're arguing. I guess we don't know yet if that's true, but that's certainly what the Alberta government is arguing. Now, the response to it is going to be interesting. Obviously, we have some sense of the war of words, Smith haranguing the federal government from sort of the bully pulpit, shall we say. But what are the actual mechanisms that can be used to resist this if they feel that's the road to go down? Well, the first, and it has more or less been promised, is some sort of motion under the Alberta Sovereignty Act, which would, well, we don't totally know what it would do. The best indication we have of this is that it just sort of means that Alberta's employees, whether that's public servants or Crown Corporation employees, wouldn't need to sort of help the implementation of this process. So Alberta would sort of take a step back, and if it's going to happen, we're not going to participate in it, so long as the law allows for that. So that's probably what that would do. The other option, of course, is a lawsuit. I would also probably expect the Alberta government to sue the federal government over this. Whether or not you can sue on a draft regulation, I think, is a bit of an open question. But certainly when there's final regulations, that might be an option for the Alberta government there. Bit of a mixed record fighting in court, the Alberta government over the last 5-6 years. So we'll see how that pans out if we go down that road. And of course, I mean, the other option here is there's a very good chance we're going to have a Conservative prime minister in the next year. So could just wait it out, because this is probably not a policy that a future Prime Minister, Pierre Poilievre, is going to keep.
And Tyler, still no word yet on the by-election for Lethbridge West. Premier Daniel Smith says NDP leader Naheed Nenshi still needs a seat, so she wants to kind of hold them both simultaneously, saving taxpayers money.
Yeah, that's the idea. I mean, if you run a by-election, obviously it costs some money in terms of the Alberta officials that are going to need to be involved in things like that. So she's saying, well, look, why don't we do them simultaneously and deal with it all at once? Um, Nenshi does not seem quite so keen to run for a by-election seat. It's a little bit of a mystery. Not totally sure what's going on there. The legislature's obviously been back for a couple weeks, and he hasn't been a part of it. So there was an argument years ago when Jagmeet Singh first became leader of the federal NDP that if he stayed out of the House of Commons, he could sort of elevate himself above the fray, not get involved in the antics of question period, that sort of thing. So there's the possibility that's what Nenshi's people are thinking. Maybe they simply haven't convinced someone in caucus to step aside in a safe seat to allow him to run. That's also a possibility. But it's certainly a bit odd, right? I mean, if you're not in the House, you're not getting sort of social media clips from the jousting and things like that, and it's harder to come across the media. It's harder for the media to find you to comment on things. So it's a bit of an odd situation. But well, the Lethbridge West by-election has to be coming at some point. It needs to be called before, I think, January 1st, 2025. So, which, gosh, that's what, 6, 7 weeks away, which is frightening for all kinds of reasons. But certainly, we should have some indication on that by the end of the year.
If you're looking for it, Naheed Nenshi will be here in Lethbridge on Friday, and we got Premier Daniel Smith here today. So there you go. Making this a priority, because I mean, obviously, this is a big seat that needs to be won. Both parties are targeting it. Tyler, a document that was released in April but was only reported on recently sets out the framework for developing a new school curriculum for all Alberta students. Now, there was a certain line that kind of jumped out and caught a lot of attention, including your own. Tell me a bit about it.
Yeah, really interesting. It was a line that said that Alberta students should learn about the history of Alberta's oil industry, and Alberta students should learn about how Alberta oil is the most ethically produced oil in the world. This is a throwback to a 2010 book from Ezra Levant, the conservative commentator, called Ethical Oil, and he wrote the book basically saying, look, if I was trying to convince sort of a progressive university student why the Alberta oil industry is a good thing, what would the argument be that I would make? And he basically says ethical oil is the argument. This is, this oil is produced in a jurisdiction that has equal rights for all, treats women and minorities better than some other places like Saudi Arabia or Iran or Russia or somewhere like that. And so that's sort of the argument. And I find it really fascinating because I think this argument, it's really become part of our political culture and the way we talk about the oil industry. You hear politicians say some version of ethical oil, making that some version of that argument. You hear it all the time. And it may now be sort of working its way into the curriculum when that's all said and done. So, I mean, obviously, there's some controversy that's gonna come from that, whether that's from environmental groups. There's certainly been some pushback on this sort of stuff from the teachers' unions and some education experts and things like that. But it just really jumped out at me because this has been such an influential argument over the past sort of 15 years in Alberta, and it's just fascinating to see that it's being proposed in a more official sense in an education curriculum document.
The province is overhauling its access to information legislation. Now, Tyler, this is something that we use as journalists all of the time. Now, there are a couple of changes coming out that you're not too happy about. Can you explain?
Yeah, so this is one of those things that is a little bit inside baseball for journalists, although lawyers and business associations and stuff like that do use access to information or freedom of information requests all the time, basically to just pry out information from the government that they haven't publicly released. They might announce a policy and you'll say, well, I wonder what the advice was from the public service on that policy. So you ask for those documents. You may or may not get them, but at least you've tried. The changes are basically twofold. The first is that it will restrict from being released advice that staff have given to ministers, which and that's often a goldmine of information because you might have an intemperate staffer say that something's a really bad idea and you have it in an email and then when you get it that's turns out to be a pretty good story. So the UCP is saying that, well, look, this was sort of the policy all along, and the NDP is saying, well, when we were in government we released this stuff all the time. So little lack of clarity there, but certainly an official restriction, at least on something that can be quite valuable for people using this legislation. And the other one is just extending timelines on how quickly responses to requests can be made. And this is a system generally sort of plagued by delays. So expanding that timeline a little bit, well, maybe not the end of the world, is certainly something that some journalists have looked at and gone, nah, darn, we're going to be waiting even longer for this stuff.
Very true. Tyler, the province is also lifting trapping restrictions around several fur-bearing animals, such as otters, lynx, and wolverines. Now, what was the justification for this, according to Forestry Minister Todd Loewen?
Well, the restrictions that are in place are for some of those animals pretty much a complete restriction on it. And Minister Loewen basically said, look, we have these restrictions and these limits, but we don't really know what the population of these animals looks like. And so his argument is one of the simpler ways to get a sense of what the population looks like is to open up trapping, and then trappers can report back how many they captured, things like that, and you can perhaps extrapolate the larger population out of those numbers. Now, of course, conservation officials, well, conservation advocates, I should say, are saying, "Wow, this process is completely backwards. Why wouldn't you err on the side of caution and try and do a count in some other fashion before lifting the rules?" So one of those things that might be a little bit controversial in some circles, but also a not inconsequential industry. I think there's about 1,600 people working in the trapping industry in Alberta, so it's not nobody, and I guess we'll see if counting the trapped animals sort of after the fact gives us a better estimate of what the populations look like.
21st century and still big business. Who would have thought that, you know? He's our legislative reporter and the Alberta correspondent with the National Post. Tyler Dawson, thanks again for joining us today from Edmonton.
Thanks for having me, Hal.